My paranormal experiences happened in western Oklahoma in September 28th of 2016. And it kind of rocked my world for at least 2 months, but it continued to bother me for several more. I'm a radiation therapist, but also have a oil field service. And I run hotshot equipment out to drilling rigs, and I go into a lot of desolate areas. And this night I was coming back from a location, and I was driving down the highway, and I met this car that was absolutely flying. I had to be doing 85, but that time of year, the deer are very thick, and everybody in that area knows to slow down. And I was curious at the high rate of speed. So I continued on, topped the hill, and started down the hill on a curve. And I noticed something on the side of the road. Wasn't quite sure what it was until I kept getting a little closer, a little closer. And I noticed it was something fairly tall, standing up. And of course, my mind's going through, did somebody lose some equipment off the back of the truck? And as I continued to get closer, I realized this wasn't equipment. So I started slowing down. And once I got fairly close, I looked and I thought, this thing has a coyote head. And, my first thoughts was, is this a dummy or... But the closer I got to it, I realized the thing turned and looked at me. And my pickup I was driving was a Chevrolet one-ton dually, good lights, and I could see it very well. It was standing in silver-tipped blue stem. It was wasn't waist high, but it was fairly tall, and the light reflects off of it really well. And it's been all these years, and it's still bothering me. As I got closer, I realized it just wasn't looking at the pickup. It was looking through the windshield right at me. And I kept getting slower and slower because I was afraid it would run out in front of me. And I probably went by, I was doing 15, 20 miles an hour. I was going pretty slow. And as I went by, it just looked straight right at me, right in the driver's side window. And I had probably, I guesstimated 15 to 20 feet to where he was standing from where I went past him. And like I said, I was going very slow, and it seemed like it took forever because I just could not believe what I was seeing. I'm part Cherokee, and I'm familiar with stories that I just, for years, never thought was true. I thought it was all myth and legend. But I had a pretty good idea what this was. It wasn't a Bigfoot, it wasn't a dog man, because this thing was so skinny, and the arms were very long and very thin. And I was thinking, there's no way you could get a human in a suit like this. But I saw the face and the head on it, and it just looked completely real. I grew up in an area that's pretty much desolate anyway, on a dairy and beef farm. We run cattle, and we had lots of coyotes, mountain lions. I've heard my first mountain lion since I was 6 years old. So I'm very familiar with what especially coyotes look like, since they were a major problem. But what I could feel when I went by was just a sense of pure evil. But it was also like it knew who I was and where I lived. I don't understand that. Sorry. But that feeling was just overwhelming. And I've hit the gas, and I'm pulling a 40-foot trailer, and I have lights on the back of the trailer to see to unload it at night. And I turn those on just to make sure it didn't get on the trailer. And it just unnerves me. And I couldn't sleep for several days. And I had a good friend that I got to know him from Bigfoot. And I talked to him about it. And we talked about an hour. And I was just sopping wet with sweat. I just couldn't believe what I'd seen, what I'd felt from it. And, it just didn't seem like it helped a lot to talk to people. It did help, but I got to thinking, I knew people that had encounters with thugs, and they had a sketch artist do sketches for them, and they helped them work through it. And I put on Facebook if anybody knew of a good sketch artist. Well, it wasn't 5 minutes, and Kurt texted me and said, I've got somebody that would be really good for this. Let me call her and see if it's okay if you call her. And he did. And he called me back real quickly. And I immediately called her. And it was Sibylla Irwin. And we started visiting a little bit. And I was telling her that I'd like to do a sketch. I'd seen something. And she thought it was Bigfoot. I said, no, I've seen Bigfoot. And that didn't upset me. I got pretty excited, but, I was glad to see one. But I said, no, this is a little different. You're going to think I'm crazy. I said, but I saw what I believe was a skinwalker. Well, she was very shocked. She said, I have never done one of those. So we started working on it. Now in this process, this is almost 2 months. And we worked probably a month on the sketch. And for 2 months, I couldn't sleep. I'd wake up in the middle of the night seeing this thing in my dreams. I just couldn't sleep. I'd doze off and I'd see it. But once we started working on this, I noticed it was helping a lot. And she was asking me a lot of questions I wasn't sure of, like, how tall was he? I said, I'm guessing 5 to 6 feet. She said, was he standing on the edge of the road or on the road? I said, he was just off the shoulder. I said, there's a little slope to it. She said, okay, I want you to go back up there. And I said, really? I really didn't want to go back up there. But she said, yes, go back up there. And I want you to get out and measure as close as you can where he was standing to the level of the road. Get that height. And then from that point of the highway up to where his eyes were matching yours or whatever. So I did. I went back up there. And I didn't get out until I had a pistol on me. But I thought, like this thing's going to do any good against it. And so I walked over and did my measurements, and I got back in the pickup, and I just was shocked, giving the account for the slope of the road, and he was roughly almost eye level with me, and give or take 2 or 3 inches. And it figured anywhere from 7'6" to 8'6" tall. It was very tall. But still, again, I still can't believe how skinny it was. I was just amazed. And still nervous about being in the area. But I went back and called her and told her what I found. And she's got to asking me a little more in detail on the Skinwalker. And she'd do it a little bit, and then she'd send me a iteration to see what I thought. And I kept telling her the shoulders are tall and rounded right at the AC joint where the arm connects to the shoulder. I said, that sounds weird, but they were high and rounded. And plus I said, this was really, really silver. It was just sparkled. It was so bright. And, his eyes were almost squinting at me like he was just glaring at me. But he didn't move around much. He just kind of turned with me as I come down the hill and then went past him. I think it took us almost a month, maybe a little over, to finish the sketch. And I had some Cheyenne friends that was wanting to see it. And so when I got through, I took it up there and showed him. And he called over some of his friends. They work at a casino. And, I told them what I think this is, because some of them, they don't want to see it. You don't want to speak it. And they said, no, they want to see it. And as soon as I showed them the picture, they all said, that's a Skinwalker. And then this one lady came up and she said, that's a Cheyenne Skinwalker. She said, do you want to know how I believe that's a Cheyenne Skinwalker? And I said, yes. And she said, those shoulders, that is a Cheyenne trait. Well, when she said that, I remember playing basketball with some Cheyenne friends, and that's what their AC joint looks like, kind of tall and rounded. And they all started saying, yes, that's a Cheyenne Skinwalker. Well, this sighting was on a creek, and for years it was called Dead Indian Creek. It was seemed a little odd. Plus, this was just a few miles from a very well-known battle with an Indian village by the cavalry from a very famous colonel. And I've heard lots of stories, even at night, go to the battlefield, that you can actually hear screams and gunfire. And I haven't ever gone up there to see that. But like I said, it's been since 16, and I haven't talked much about it the last couple of years, and it's bringing back a lot of feelings and emotions just to rehash it. But there was one very, very weird thing happened. I don't know what to think about it. While we were doing the sketch, Sibylla had me write down the whole story, have it fresh on my mind. And while I was writing it down, I just had this overwhelming feeling. And I told Sibylla, I said, it's here. She said, do you see it? I said, no, I can feel it. It's out in the front yard. I can tell you where it's standing. I can tell you which way it's looking. I don't understand this. And I said, it's looking into the window of where I'm sitting. And it's probably 100 feet from the window. And Sibylla knew I'm a Christian. And she said, start calling out the name of Jesus and recite the Lord's Prayer, which I did. And within seconds, it was moving away. And I could tell you which direction it was going. That may be just in my mind, but that was just overwhelming evil I could feel. But it moved on, and I did not have any more trouble with it. I've been back through that area a lot over the years. And there's times I can go through it and doesn't feel a thing. And next time I go through, it's just overwhelming. Something's there. Now, I've wondered all this time about who that other person was, because they must have seen him. The way they were driving, they had to have seen it. And I've been trying to find whoever was driving that car, which I haven't had any luck, but I have had two other people that have seen it. And I just lucked out on one of them. And I got to visit with both of them, and they described what I saw. And they both were close. In fact, one of them was a truck driver. And he said he was standing on the opposite lane when he went past him. And he said he was big, and he looked right at him when he went by. The other lady, there's a country bar and grill, and she was a cook there. And she'd closed up and was leaving. It was about 1 a.m. And she said she has a little chihuahua that goes with her, and said he froze. And so she reached down and picked him up. And when she picked him up and looked right in front of her, about 15 feet, this thing was standing there. And she was right by her car, so she jumped in her car and left. And she said that's the last time that she had seen it. Something I had that was really unusual. I had a friend that came out. He was wanting to hear the Bigfoot. Certain times of year, I can hear him pretty often, especially in May. And he was out here, and we'd heard 2, and we heard some tree knocks, and then got quiet. And so he told me to make one of my calls. So I made the call, and I had one kind of a howl growl at me from the opposite direction that we'd been hearing him. And he was probably 300 yards from us. But so we turned to look at him, and while we were standing there looking at him, all of a sudden this light shoots out, and it goes from one side of the pasture to the other, and it's almost a half a mile long. But it was just like a lightsaber zipping out. It was mainly white, but there was some reds and blues in it. And it sit there long enough that I looked at both directions trying to figure out where this light source came from. And then all of a sudden it just zipped back the opposite direction. Went from left to right, right to left. And there were no vehicles. There was nothing that we could see to generate that kind of light, which only time I've seen that is like on, Star Wars movies. And we were both just flabbergasted. And, the light wasn't very wide. It might have been 5 feet wide. And I was at a Bigfoot conference, and Ron Moorhead was there. And he talked about the same thing he had seen. What he saw wasn't near as long. And I just got up and went back to the back, and I was talking to his wife, asking about the light. And she told me what it was and what had happened. And I told her, I said, I have seen that. I said, but mine was a lot longer. And she said, you stay here. Ron will want to talk to you after the meeting. And we visited about it and, compared notes. And he said, mine wasn't anywhere near that long. But he said, did you have any Bigfoot activity? I said, yes. We just had several that we'd heard and tree knocks. But that's pretty much it on that one. Also had things happen in my house. In fact, ever since we moved in, we bought this house from neighbors and moved it about 8 miles, and we remodeled it. It took us about 6 months to remodel it. And, everything's going great. The house felt warm and cozy before we moved it. But after we got it here, and we didn't see anything going on till the first night that we stayed in it. And the bedroom was added on to the original house. It was, an old country house. In fact, it was destroyed in a tornado in 2017. And at that point, it was between 120 and 130 years old. Solid house. But you had to go outside to go upstairs originally. But they had added a bedroom onto it where you were in the bedroom, you could go upstairs. Well, our bed was butted up to the wall, and it was in the middle of the night. All of a sudden, we heard some noises, and my wife said, "What was that?" I said, "I don't know. There's not any wind." So we kind of went back to sleep, and then all of a sudden it started again. But this time it was like the old window weights in a house when they hit the wall when you'd move it. This hit every 2x4 above our head going down the wall from one straight across and hitting very hard. And it did that 3 or 4 times. And I got up and looked around to see what that could be. There's no windows above us. And actually, there's cross brace, and we had blown in foam insulation. There was no way anything could be loose in the walls. So that was the first experience. And then after that, we'd have doors opening, and you'd hear somebody walking across the floor in the kitchen or in the living room. And, that was pretty much it. It was nothing serious. It didn't bother the kids, didn't bother us until we got a daughter-in-law, and it didn't seem to like her. I mean, it would turn on the water. We'll start standing right in front of it. Would turn it on, turn on lights, turn off lights. A bulb would blow out right on top of her, and we'd never had bulbs pop before, but the light bulb would just explode. And she was in the kitchen, and the burner came on. And she got where she had to stay overnight there anymore. She'd had enough. And, then it calmed back down to the normal stuff until one day my son, he was in for a visit, and I was in the kitchen. He came running back into the kitchen real quick, and he was just white. I said, "What's the matter?" He said, "I saw her." I said, "You saw who?" He said, "The ghost." I said, "It was a she?" He said, "Yes." It was a black-haired lady, and she had some kind of dress on that was low on the shoulders. And he said, "But all I could see was from the waist up." And when I made direct eye contact with her, she just dissolved. And I think that's the last time he stayed in the house. But things like that rocked on until the house was destroyed. Nothing serious. And if she got too active, I could just use God and say, "In Jesus' name, you have no power or authority here. Be gone." And it would clear up for 3 or 4 months. And then it would slowly start back. In fact, when Sibylla came there, she told me, she said, "This house is dark." I said, "Yes, it is." And she said, "Do you ever have any problems?" I told her, "No." I said, "It's all minor stuff." And it was funny. One time I was remodeling, and I'd told the contractors, "Things might happen, but don't worry about it." And I was at work, and I came home one day at noon just to see how they were doing. And all the workers were out in the yard. And I went inside, and the wife of the contractor was just laughing. I asked her, "What's the matter?" And she said, "The TV's covered up. The remotes are hidden so they wouldn't get dusty." And she said the TV came on. I said, "Oh, yeah, it does that often. There's times I'll be watching it, and she'd turn it off 3 times in a row, and I'd turn it back on. I'd finally tell her to leave it alone, and it'd stay on." But one of the workers would not come back in the house. In fact, they had to move him to a different job. He was Spanish, and he kept saying, "El Diablo, El Diablo." But the rest of them, they came back in. And I said, "Nothing's going to happen. They're not going to bother you. They just like to mess with you." But I didn't have any more trouble after that, and nothing serious other than hearing him walk across the floor. But after the tornado, and the house was completely destroyed, and we had to haul it off. And we had to take everything right down to the footing, the cement and the slabs. And after that, I couldn't feel anything. It was like it was all gone. And for years, even my in-laws thought, well, maybe there was somebody buried in this. There was an ancient tree row here, that had come through, a wagon train or something. We had no idea, but I had a friend, Cheyenne, and she came out just to see. It might have been, an Indian. And when she got here, she said, "There's nothing here." And she said, "It must have left when you hauled all the rubble off. They tend to go with the house." And I've been here since 17 after the tornado, and nothing has happened. It's been calm. Also, things that happened to my mother when she was a teenager. They lived in South Texas, and her dad was a Border Patrol agent down there and transferring pretty often down in the Valley of Texas. And they'd moved to home. And they moved into this one home, and the owner had passed away in it. But they didn't think anything about it. And they'd see things that had been moved, and they couldn't figure out who moved them or why, but they just didn't think anything about it. And one day they came home, and there was a doorway. And then if you look on one side of the room, there's a mirror that showed that doorway. And she said, she's looking at the doorway and there's nothing there. And she looked at the mirror and there's a man standing in the doorway. And she looked back and forth several times. And she ran in screaming to her mother, and they come in there to check it out. And she carried, because the family's always getting threatened because he's a Border Patrol. And she brought a pistol in there, and there's nothing there. But later on, they all got to witness the man in the mirror standing in the doorway. Just, there was nothing there. And another time, there was an envelope that laid on the desk, and they couldn't find it one day. And they were in the library, and they said all of a sudden this envelope come out from between the books and floated across the room until my aunt screamed, and then it just fell. And it just seemed like there was a lot of things happening in that house. But after that, they decided they were going to move.
My paranormal experiences, well, they go back to childhood. I've had numerous experiences throughout the years. I'll take you back to when I was 3 years old. This was my very, very first one. It was in Beverley, which is near the town where I live. And I'd gone there with my grandma and my mum to the old military museum. At this point in time, they had the Lancaster bomber there. And as I was going up the steps, I refused to go up them. I didn't really think much of it until many years later. But that one will come apparent later on in time. Moving forward to when I was 7 years old, it was Christmas Eve, and me and my dad had gone into the town centre to do some Christmas shopping. And we was coming back down Walton Street. Now, with Walton Street, you've got Anleby Road at one end and Springbank West at the other. And at the Springbank West end, you've got the train lines going across, which lead all the way up to Scarborough and into the centre of Hull where the train station is. And back in this day and age, it's all changed now, obviously, compared to where it was when I was young. But there was an old signal box house opposite the junction, and there was an alcove of trees. And this particular experience was, I can still see it to this day, which is kind of weird. There was this old woman stood there in the alcove, but what was strange about her, she wasn't wearing normal clothes, shall we say. She was wearing leaves. She looked very old. I spun my head to the left, spun back, bang, she was gone. And to this day, I can't explain truly what I saw, but to me, it was a full apparition. And I didn't really have many experiences until later in my teens, was when the next bout happened, shall we say. What I saw next was kind of weird. Now, in the Hull, where I live, in the town of Kingston upon Hull, we've had sightings of dogmen, ghosts, UFOs, you name it. But this one was kind of weird. I was walking my dog one evening down World Road, and we cut off to where you've got the golf course. And between the golf course and Priory Road, you've got, well, it's all fields. On these fields, you've got this building. It was in ruins back in this day and age. Nowadays, somebody's bought it and they're trying to repair it. But according to the historian that I met later down the line, they said it was to do with this outer building was part of an old priory. The priory there is not there nowadays because back in Henry VIII's time, he killed it off. But I was stood there, I'd just rolled a cigarette, and I was stood there with my dog in my right hand, and we saw this shadowy figure walking towards us. Now, what was weird about this was the fact that normally as shadowy figures walk towards you, you start to see the outline of a person. You normally see people come apparent and you can start to make out the facial features. What was strange about this one was you couldn't really see anybody. It was like this black shadow just walking towards us. Many people that I know through the area have constantly said this area is haunted. I didn't truly believe it until that particular night when that happened. But I've always had an interest in the paranormal. I've loved the paranormal since I was young. I used to watch shows like Strange But True, Tales of the Unexpected, Paranormal Fact or Fate, things like that. And it was only when I was about 19, I spoke to Vic about this. This was a potential dogman, but I'm not 100% sure on this. This next encounter still haunts me to this day. I was staying over at my grandparents' house on Anlaby Road. Well, just off Anlaby Road. And it was 1 o'clock in the morning, and I was reading a book. Funnily enough, it was a horror book. And I'd finished reading it, and I was just about to turn the light off when, for some reason, I was drawn to the window. Bearing in mind, the windows were shut. The curtains were shut. There was a street lamp opposite, and just before I flicked the light off, there was a shadowy figure of a wolf walking past the window. What was weird about this was he was upright, and you could see claws about 30 centimetres long, curling around and moving as a human would. But as you was looking at this creature, you could only see the bottom half of the face, and I froze with terror, and I refused to go outside to look. I wish I had, because then I could have proved what this creature was without a shadow of a doubt. But I put it to the back of my mind. And moving onwards, later in life, I decided to start looking more into the paranormal. I used to go on paranormal investigations, and my very first one was very creepy indeed. I went to a place near Hull known as Fort Paul, and this fort dates back to Henry VIII's time, because along the River Humber, you've got 3 major ports where it's the major shipping lanes. You've got Hull, you've got Immingham, and you've got Grimsby. And Henry VIII decided to set up a fort in order to defend the River Humber. And we was in the Henry VIII tunnel, which is one of the oldest tunnels of the fort. And as you go down it, there's a set of stairs leading up. So most of the people that was hanging around in the bottom, me and this guy called Gaz, we decided to go upstairs. We was the only 2 up there. And I was stood at one end, he was stood at the other. Next thing you know, we all turn the torches out and people start wolf whistling, trying to get whatever was in there with us to communicate. Next thing, I felt a tap on my arm. So I spun round, I said to Gaz, was that you? So I shone the torch at him. And he said to me, look, Jamie, how could I touch you? It wasn't even within arm's distance. So I was like, oh, okay, that's fair enough. So I was at the back of my mind thinking, well, what was it then? So we wasn't really getting much else in there. So we were all heading out. Most of the group had already gone ahead of us. Gaz goes up and out the tunnel. Next thing you know, two people who were lagging behind came up behind me, two lasses there were. And we decided we'd turn around and take a photo, see if we could catch anything. One of them, wolf whistled and said goodbye. Next thing we heard was footsteps coming straight at us, running. I don't know whether it was our screams or our feet that got out of there first. We was absolutely petrified. And Lisa, who was running the investigation, came to us and said, well, what's happened? So we explained it to her. They went back down. A couple more of them. I went with them. We replicated what happened, but unfortunately nothing else happened in there. So we carried on around the fort and we ended up in the Lancaster bomber. Now, when the Beverley Military Museum closed down, the Lancaster bomber that was there was transferred to Fort Paul. And this is where the connection to my first paranormal experience connects with more or less present times. Unfortunately, nowadays, Fort Paul is closed down. But as we was going through the Lancaster bomber, we started hearing banging noises coming from outside of it. We had our group inside and the other group was at the other end of the fort. And the way we was all keeping in touch with each other was through walkie-talkies. And nothing much else happened that night. And it was only when I was speaking to my mum about it, and she went, well, that makes sense, doesn't it? I was like, what are you on about, Mum? She went, don't you remember when that Lancaster bomber was in Beverley and you wouldn't go up it? It's as though I knew it was haunted when I was young, but I didn't quite understand it. Another paranormal experience I've had was in Warren Percy. Warren Percy is an old medieval village. It's deserted, it's more or less derelict, and it's between Malton and Beverley. It's more towards the Malton end of it. The first time we went there, we couldn't exactly get there because we got chased off by cows. The second time we went there, it was drizzling down with rain. There was no cows on the field, thankfully, so we actually got into the village. And as you just go into the village, there's this old derelict church. So we thought, right, let's set up the base camp here. We'll do our investigation here due to the fact the weather was appalling and we couldn't exactly go anywhere. So we set up all of our equipment. We set up grid lights, EVP recorders, K2 meters, cameras. We had the whole entire church covered. And as the night was going on, we started hearing banging noises. And I mean, as though somebody was trying to kick the door in. So one of us went out one way, one of us went out the other to try and see if it was kids messing around or if anybody had come down messing around. Nobody in sight. So we thought, well, that's a bit strange. So another paranormal team ended up coming along later on, which we didn't know that was coming. So we started telling them what had happened. So that way they'd have a little instigation as to what had gone on. Unfortunately, we never heard back from them, which is a great shame. But another investigation I went on that sticks out in my mind was Spofford Castle. Now, Spofford Castle is between York and Knaresborough. But it's more near Knaresborough than it is York. You turn off. So you could actually triangulate point this. You've got Knaresborough to the west, Wetherby to the south, and York to the east. And between Knaresborough and Wetherby, on that road, you've got a nice little village called Spofford. And in the middle of the village is an old ruin known as Spofford Castle. Now, this place is notoriously haunted, and I've done numerous investigations there, and we decided to go as a 3-man strong team one night. Now, to give you a little bit of backstory of Spofford Castle, back in the 15th century, there was castles galore in England, but not all castles looked like what you see in the pictures. Some of them were like manor houses with turrets sticking up the side of them. Now, this one was very much like that. You came into the village, parked up. This is actually an English heritage site, so if you put that into Google, you'll find it. And you go up this hill, and the whole upper level of the building is destroyed, more or less. So you go down the hill into the bottom grounds. Now, me and my best friend and my other friend, we went there one night as a three-man team. We got there quite a while before sunset. So that way we could set up any equipment we needed. We set up base camp in the old kitchen, which is the only covered part of it. Now, I don't know if this was kids messing around this bit, but we started to get crumbling onto the equipment. Yeah, fair enough, it's an old place. You'd expect things to go crumbling down. So the night draws on, and as we're investigating, I come up with a bright idea of putting them into the main hall and me up above, so that way you can watch what's going on. Next thing you know, rocks start launching at them. And they're like, Jamie, it's getting bad in here. There's something in here trying to drive us apart. And these rocks were continuously being thrown. And they was like, well, surely it's kids messing around. I was like, I can promise you there was nobody else around. Apparently, sometimes kids have a habit of playing in this castle, but there was nobody there. So I'm like, right, I'm coming down to join you. So I go down into the main castle, and as we're in there, these rocks start hurtling. I'm like, right, let's get out of here. Let's get back to base camp. So I decided to head straight for the door that leads up to the hill so we can go round and down into where our base camp was. And as we was going up, we had our torches on, and you could see like little black shadows flitting around everywhere. So we get back into the base camp, and I'm like, right, we're going to ask the spirits, or the ghosts, whatever you want to call them, whether you want us to leave or not. So I start asking, and next thing you know, the torch just goes out. My hand was nowhere near the push button. I made sure I cusped it deliberately, so you got the push button facing towards me and the torch going that way, and the torch just goes out. Back in these days when I used to run my own team, we used to write case files, and we all agreed in particular that that place was haunted. Another experience, I've actually seen UFOs, and this one goes back to the Euros of last year. I'd gone to my brother's, I think it was the quarter-final match, England against Ukraine, and we'd watched the match, and I was walking back home, and all I saw was like two green and red lights. You could easily mistake this for a drone. Now, in particular, I don't believe this was a drone. For the fact there was no noise, normally a drone would rise up, go down slowly. This thing shot up and then shot straight back down again. There was no sound. The lights weren't even blinking. I thought, hang on, that's a bit weird. So I started looking into the UFO phenomenon a little bit, and I can't explain it. So that is my paranormal experiences within them particular realms. Now, my advice to anybody who's going to go looking for paranormal experiences, go with an open mind. If you go into a haunted location, don't go expecting things to happen or not expecting them to happen. Some people out there are very skeptical. It's like an old friend of mine, he's skeptical. Things used to happen to him, but he'd automatically start thinking, oh, well, it's got to be this, that, and the other. No. People do say, well, the paranormal isn't real. Well, when you've experienced a lot of different phenomena and seen a lot of things out there, it truly does stick in your mind it's one of those things that when you talk about them, you can explicitly remember everything. So those are the few out there who say the paranormal isn't real. Just keep an open mind on this, because truly there is more to this world than meets the eye. And those are my paranormal experiences.
If you've had a paranormal experience and would like to be a guest on the show, please contact us by going to myparax.com. That's myparaex.com. Thanks for listening.